Okay, hey everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today at the RZ podcast. Joined with actually two very special guests. Mr. Jeff, calling out of Missouri or where? Detroit. Where are you calling out of, Jeff?
Detroit, Michigan.
Detroit, Michigan. And what time is it there right now?
10 o'clock p.m.
10 o'clock p.m. And Mr. Ephraim, am I saying that right?
Ephraim.
Ephraim, yeah. Portnoy, calling out of. You were calling out of where?
Jerusalem, Israel.
Jerusalem, the Holy Land. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys so much, both for joining us on today's podcast. And what time is it there, Ephraim?
It's 5 a.m.
5 a.m. Well, thank you so much for waking up this early. I know we're just talking about you have 10 kids, so you're probably trying to get this done out of the way before they wake up. Is that right?
Yeah. They start waking up. They're supposed to start waking up like 6. So.
Yeah. So we'll this will run about an hour. But you were talking the other day about trying to get your kids out on the bus, and I said, "Well, 10 kids, you guys should have your own bus. You guys should have your own bus, right?"
Yeah, but that's everyone in the neighborhood also has 10 kids. So.
Wow, that's amazing. All right. Well, we have a lot to talk about today. So before we do, I just want to ask you guys a few general questions, just kind of to break a little bit of ice, because this will be a very touchy topic. So we want to be very careful as we're dealing with this. And so before we do, though, I usually do some kind of friendly fire round. So I want to ask you guys a few general questions before we get started. And here we go. I'm going to kick it off to you. Jeff, Star Wars or Star Trek?
Star Wars.
Star Wars. Okay. Ephraim?
Star Trek.
Star Trek. Okay. We're off to a bad start, but okay. Here we go. Next one. You guys prefer coffee or tea? Coffee. Yeah. I saw you mixing something up in there. I hope you're having some coffee, Ephraim.
Yeah, of course. Coffee. What else? Come from America.
Okay. All right. And here we go. Last one. It's kind of a retarded question, but if you guys were in charge of the torture department of the CIA and you had to put a song on loop to torture someone, what song would you use? Ephraim.
I can't even think of something like that.
Jeff?
Yeah, I'm with Ephraim on that. I couldn't even tell you. There's so many bad songs.
There's so many. You guys ever heard "Never Gonna Let You Go" by Roy Ashburn? I think they used to rickroll people with that song. But okay, that being said, first and foremost, I would just like if both of you guys could give me just a 2-minute introduction of who you are, where you've come from, any kind of background, biographical information you could give me for about 1 or 2 minutes, or if you like to go a little bit longer, go a little bit longer, but not too long, hopefully. And we'll start off with Mr. Jeff Scoop, and I must say you're looking pretty good. Jeff and I look like we might be brothers here, bald and the jackets alike. But okay, Jeff.
Yeah, we could be. Give it a little time there. So I'm Jeff Scoop. I run a nonprofit organization called Beyond Barriers. What we do is we help people get out of extremist organizations. We work in a program we call relational dialogue. So we get people to try to come together and work together in society. And I think it's something that's incredibly important right now. And my background, I spent 25 years, so 27 years total, but 25 years as the national leader of the largest Nazi party in the United States, the National Socialist Movement. So that's why I understand and work in countering violent extremism today, and because I speak from experience.
All right, and Mr. Ephraim, if you can, Ephraim. I'm sorry, I'm probably going to butcher that again.
Yeah. So I'm from New York. I grew up in an Orthodox Jewish family in New York. And around now it's almost 12 years ago, I moved to Jerusalem with my family. I moved to Israel with my family. A few years ago, I moved to Jerusalem. I've worked as a social worker, as a small business owner. social worker, usually working with kids. And now I'm not working in a social worker, but I volunteer in a yeshiva, which is like I guess like a Jewish religious school for American kids who are learning in Israel for a year, which is pretty common.
All right. Is that when people go on their birthrights to Israel? Is that the same kind of thing?
Not really. Amongst Orthodox kids, especially ultra-Orthodox kids, it's they usually come after they finish high school. They come to Israel for like a year or two to learn in the yeshiva, or the girls' yeshiva is usually called a seminary, and they just like so they learn here for a year or two. But ultra-Orthodox kids, it's a couple years after high school. First, they learn a few years in the States, and then they come here for around 2 years. And it's just like to experience, it's not to experience Israel. Like birthright is more like experiencing Israel. For ultra-Orthodox, it's more about experiencing Eretz Yisrael, which means like the Holy Land of Israel. And there's not really any connection to Zionism. Or birthright is like more like a Zionist type of political going back. This is more like a religious type of connecting to the land or the people of the land.
I see. And before we get started, I would like to ask you a question. Have you ever gotten a chance to talk to anyone who was like a former hate, like a former hate group, or anything who might have some kind of negative, Jewish biases?
Amongst us Orthodox Jews, we have what you could call extremists. We call them kanoim, which means you could translate. Yeah, you could translate it as zealots.
Can you spell that?
Is the Hebrew way or the English way?
I don't speak Hebrew.
And the English is zealots. Z-E-A-O. Z-E.
Oh, okay. So that's
zealots. So those are. So I have spoken to people who grew up as kanoim. Like you sent me a video a few days ago about a group. Yeah. So those groups, I've met guys who used to be in those groups or still are in those groups, and who got out of it, or who grew up in that type of group and they don't believe in their ideology anymore. But it's very, very different than Nazi.
Right. But just for the listener, would you mind? Because I'm sure that you could give a little bit more context into what I sent you. I will say, I think these guys are based in London, and they're Jewish, but I don't know if you'd call them extremists or Orthodox or ultra-Orthodox, but they believe that Israel should not be a country. So can you give us a little background on that, please?
So in general, Zionism is a political ideology. It's not a religious ideology. You could be Jewish without being Zionist. You could be Zionist without being Jewish. It's not really connected in that way. So most ultra-Orthodox Jews are what we would call non-Zionist, meaning they just aren't Zionists. They might not care about Zionism. They might feel affinity towards things that Zionists do, but they don't identify as a Zionist because for various reasons we could get into.
Various reasons.
A lot of historical reasons and religious reasons and political reasons. And on the fringes of ultra-Orthodoxy, there are people who, not just the fringes, I'll take that back. There are many, many ultra-Orthodox Jews who are anti-Zionist, meaning they actually have an active position that they think Zionism is wrong. And for example, if you ever heard of the Satmar Hassidic group, which is based in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and they have in Monroe, New York, and also in London and all across the world. It's probably the largest Hassidic group in the world. They're actively anti-Zionist, but they're more like a live and let live type of attitude, meaning that they'll if you ask them in the street, what do you think of Zionism? They say, we think it's wrong, and therefore what? Then let's get on with our lives. Then there's a small groups on the fringe, which we call the more extreme groups, who believe that you actively have to protest the state, and they go to protests, and they hook up with Palestinian groups, and they hook up with other anti-Israel groups in order to protest. They're more vocal and more expressive about their anti-Zionism.
You know what? I do want to get in here for a second because we're going to kick it over to Jeff to start off the series of questions. But I spent about a month in Israel, and I stayed with a Jewish man. And actually, he did, I think, at least 3 tattoos on me. And he was willing to trade me he had an iPhone. And so he did all these tattoos on me. He switched with me. But he said he called himself the world's worst Jew because, 1, he wasn't that interested in money. He was kind of like a really hippie guy. And then 2, he would go into Palestine and just to go hang out with the guys down there. And sometimes they'd catch him and make him leave. But he was like, that didn't make him anti-Jewish, but he just was pro-Palestine, Like me personally, people say, are you pro-Israel or pro-Palestine? I'm like, I'm both. I'm neither. I'm neither one or the other. I believe that everybody has a right to live and should be respected. So this isn't an either or. You can be pro both groups. And I think I told you this. I actually got to go into Palestine and stay in the home of a former, terrorist who was working with the slain parents of Jewish civilians. So, but with that being said, I do want to give Jeff an opportunity to get in here. And the first question is going to go over to Jeff. But I do want to ask you, this is kind of a serious question, but what is the fascination specifically about Jews, which has caused so much hatred and abuse, 1, for thousands of years, but 2, it's like a lot of these hate groups, the KKK or Nazis, they hate a lot of minorities, but like the Jews are the ones they spend the most time talking about. So I wonder if you could fill me in on any of that. And over to you, Jeff.
A lot of that comes from your age-old anti-Semitic tropes that are continuously recycled by these groups, and they spew that type of rhetoric and that type of language. And a lot of that comes from fear. None of them will admit that it comes from fear, but that's exactly where it comes from. It comes from fear. It comes from lack of understanding, lack of education, and not understanding these things about the Jewish community and just in general. So they have this belief that the Jews are running and controlling everything, and that everyone else is just puppets of this powerful Jewish Zionist controlling state, and that everyone is the victim of this sort of thinking. What they're not doing is they're not reflecting internally and looking at, well, these are the reasons why I'm struggling. These are the reasons why I'm not doing well in life, or so on and so forth. And they're looking for a scapegoat. And unfortunately, that happens to be the Jewish community is quite often scapegoated because they don't understand those customs. They don't understand the history and the religion and things of that nature. And working towards getting better understanding for that of those type of things, and not just the Jewish community, but the Muslim community, all the different types of communities that are out there. If we can all get along and start understanding one another a little better and learning from one another, it's like opening the doors of knowledge like nothing you've ever seen before. So I know for me personally, it was like that. Working with a lot of people in the Jewish community now, and friends at the Simon Wiesenthal Center, I've learned so much. And it was almost like discovering, like, leaving that life and then returning to civilian life or returning to civil society, like meeting people and understanding that it's almost like everything that you once believed was wrong. Like when you're a little kid in school and you go to school and it's opposite day, you wear your shirt backwards and all that kind of stuff. That's what it felt like, except on a grand scale. So if we can better educate our society and communities and get them to understand one another, we all don't have to agree on everything, but we need to understand one another.
Speaking of opposite day, whenever I was in middle school, you guys probably both remember crisscross. They used to wear their clothes backwards. But this scalp used to support braids, and I used to wear my clothes backwards and try to be like crisscross. So I totally get what you're talking about as far as things being totally backwards. And I do want to talk a little bit, really briefly, about my experience in Israel. I went there, and I don't know, I guess you're just expecting everyone to be rich because you're going off of the news or whatever you hear. But I saw a lot of ghettos that were like, well, maybe ghetto's not the right word to use, but a lot of really low income places that were just what I would expect to see in America or in the east side of Bakersfield where I grew up. And so there's definitely a misconception that a lot of Jews are well off, or there's just a lot of middle class people just trying to get by. Or I can imagine if you have 10 kids, you can't be, you're just trying to take care of your family and survive. And Ephraim, I wonder if you could fill us in a little bit on that. And you had a pretty funny joke. I'm not sure if you'd mind sharing it, but I thought it was great.
The famous joke that whenever a Jewish guy is feeling depressed, like what have I accomplished in life, what am I doing? So all you have to do is open up like a Nazi newspaper and see, oh, I run the world. I'm the richest guy in the world. I'm running everything behind the scenes. I control the weather.
Oh God. Whew. But
So,
what is the average? Just your average. You get to see it firsthand in Israel, but is the average person there just like a multimillionaire?
in Israel, especially, I think for the most part, most people are middle class, and middle class over here is not like middle class in the United States. The income here is much lower than the United States, but people make by. For example, like a normal sized apartment over here would probably be the size of a small basement apartment. And you probably
really,
yeah, they're not so big. As a social worker, I've worked in these low income places. I used to work in a town called Elad, which has all the markings of a low income community anywhere in the United States: drug abuse, teen pregnancies, crime, and they're all Jewish, all Jewish crime, Jewish and. In America, more Jews happen to figure themselves out a little bit better, so you don't have that as much. For the most part, I would say most Jews are in America probably just middle class. Of course, you do have those a few very rich, prominent Jews in media, of course. But that's not the average Jew. The average, like everyone's like saying, like, when will I be invited to the secret meeting of?
What am I going to be? You feel excluded. Yeah. That's so funny. But you know what? I'm sorry. Did you have something else to?
No, that's it. So
actually, so I do want to ask Jeff about this because so I live in South Korea, and I've met a lot of people from all over the world, specifically from like England and Canada, because they're native speakers, so there's a lot of jobs for them here in South Korea, as well as Americans. So having conversations with them, they have a lot of negative things to say about America. But the truth is that when you start really probing to some of the underlying assumptions and thoughts that they have, like they feel somewhat morally superior to America. But on the other hand, there's also just a recognition that there's a bit of a inferiority complex when you're neighbors with like the largest economy, the largest military in the world. That can make you a bit uncomfortable. And so after hearing a lot of anti-American rhetoric from these people, and I started asking them, just truly trying to find out where they're coming from. And surprisingly, a lot of them were open and willing to admit about an inferiority complex. And so I was wondering, Jeff, if you're saying that these people are the greatest, they're controlling all of these things, but simultaneously you believe that the Aryan race is like a superior race. Like, what does that say about you? Isn't that kind of like counterintuitive? Like, shouldn't they be thinking the Aryans should be running the world? So is that like a bit of a cognitive dissonance if you holding on to those views?
Sure, but don't direct it at me. We're talking about the people that are involved in it. So just to clarify that. But
Yeah.
yes, there is a lot of that, and there's a lot of disconnect in that sense because if just like what I said, a lot of it is fear and misunderstanding and lack of education. If you tell anybody that's involved in that, like, hey, it's fear. If someone would have told me that when I was involved, I would have called them a liar. I would have said, no, it has nothing to do with that. But that's when you break it down and you really get to the meat of it and the meat and bones of it, so to speak. When you get down to it, that is really what it is. And there is a big disconnect there. And like the example that you just gave, Isaiah, I think a lot of it has to do with, a lot of the people that are involved in extremist organizations in general, not just the Nazi movement but a lot of extremist movements are people that are coming from, working class backgrounds. They're struggling and they're looking for answers or solutions. And it's easier, instead of just saying, well, here's why I'm failing, or here's some of the reasons, or maybe I should work harder, or maybe I should overcome these things. It's easier. It's just easier in a lot of people's heads. It's just easier to place the blame on somebody. It's their fault. It's that person's fault. So some of that comes from a jealousy standpoint as well. Again, no one that's involved is going to admit it. But if we're psychologically breaking these things down and getting to the real answers, that's where some of it is coming in. Absolutely.
Wow. Well, thank you for that perspective. This one specifically directed at Ephraim.
Yeah,
I know I'm going to keep butchering your name. I'll just call you E, but F, because I don't want to keep butchering your name. But so this is going to take a little bit. You're going to have to enlighten us a little bit on this, because Jeff was actually saying he didn't want to come off as ignorant in this talk. I'm like, I'll be the first to admit there's a lot of ignorance on my part, because you've really helped to educate me on some misconceptions I've had, F, and you've also helped to open my eyes on things that I've just totally never thought about. So one, I really appreciate that. But two, can you explain real quick what exactly you are as far as either being Orthodox or ultra-Orthodox or Haredi? And then two, if you could talk about maybe some of the extremists who exist in Judaism, be it what you want to call a Zionist, or people who are legitimately think that Israel should not have the Holy Land. They should be kicked out. So if you could educate us, please.
Okay, so I'm Haredi, which in America or in English-speaking places, they usually translate as ultra-Orthodox. In order to differentiate between, I guess, regular Orthodox or modern Orthodox, which in general, more or less in practice, we're the same. Like, we both keep halacha, and then we both believe that that the Torah is divine, and then we're obligated to follow halacha. Unlike other groups who have other ways of understanding what halacha means, Jewish law.
Jewish law.
Other groups like conservative and reform have other beliefs about halacha and its relationship to us, how much we're obligated to and in what way. So the Orthodox view is that it's divine or divinely inspired, and we as Jews are obligated to follow it. The difference is that Haredim also believe that there's that aspects of Jewish culture which are not necessarily the law are very important to keep up as a way of us preserving our uniqueness. And for example, we tend not to go to college, although a lot of us do, like I did, and I have a lot of friends who did. And we try to have less media, less exposure to media. We try to dress differently. That's in a very short, like what would be difference between, like we try to preserve, like for example, my family tries to preserve Yiddish as a spoken language, or we try to. Yes, it was a Jewish language in Europe, and Haredim care more to preserve Yiddish or to preserve different customs, which are more like customs and cultural things, which we try to keep up. That's the main difference. So I don't know if the word ultra-Orthodox actually fits, because that's what we've come to be known as. So in Israel, they call us the Orthodox. What would be called Orthodox are just called religious or dati, and what's in America called
They're just
ultra-Orthodox
religious.
they're called Haredi, Haredim, and that's how we identify. So both groups have their extremists. So in Israel, for the most part, non-Haredi religious are Zionists. They're sometimes called religious Zionists, and as opposed to political Zionists, which is the state itself is political Zionism. And these groups, which happens to be the current prime minister, is the first religious Zionist prime minister in the history of Israel, which is a big deal, a very, very big deal, because they were always a marginalized group in Israel, just like the Haredim, because it is a secular state. It whatever you on the outside they might think it's a religious state, it's actually a very secular state, and because Judaism is a religion, but it's also a people. So you're Jewish as your ethnicity or your peoplehood or your nation, whatever way you want to describe it, and then whether or not someone's religious or not, or how religious, or how he defines as religious Judaism, that's much more diverse. And the state itself is a secular Jewish state, but you can get into other details. Exactly what and what's relationship to religion is. That's a lot of politics involved. And the Haredim and the religious Zionists are like more on this side. So Haredim, like I said before, are non-Zionists, meaning, for example, I'll just give an example. Tomorrow, like Wednesday, will be Israeli Memorial Day, and they play a siren throughout the entire country in the evening, because Jewish holidays always start at night and continue to the next day. They're from sunfall to sunfall, sundown to sundown. So at the beginning of Memorial Day and in the morning of Memorial Day, they play a siren, and you're expected as an Israeli citizen, when you hear the siren, to stop whatever you're doing, to stand in respect of the fallen soldiers for the duration of the siren. Most Haredim don't bother, because they don't identify with the state. They don't identify with the army. They probably don't even know anyone who's ever in the army, and for decades it's been like a big thorn in the side of most Israelis, that Haredim don't stand for the siren. Haredim don't care about us. Haredim don't care about our soldiers. They're parasites living off the protection of the IDF. And who don't, we don't serve in the IDF, for example. Almost none of us serve in the IDF. We have no connection to. We had so the past couple of years, like there's been an education for us, like to be more sensitive. At least if you're outside, try to show respect, just in case a non-Haredi Israeli sees you and like they think that you're disrespecting us. Or they tell us, like, you know what, don't stand in silence because you don't identify with it, but like, you know what, stand and like say like a prayer for the soldiers, like to show something. Independence Day is this Thursday. Haredim don't care. Like, actually, if you go to any Independence Day event, then they'll look at you like, what's wrong with you? Like, what do you care about this date? Like, if you take your kids to see the fireworks, then like everyone will look at you like, what is this? It's like total disconnect from the entire concept of Zionism.
Interesting.
But when it comes to the news and politics and wars and stuff like that, of course, you're living in Israel, or even if you're living in America and you most probably have relatives living here, then you're always concerned about what's going on in Israel, and like you end up having an opinion about. Listen, if I was a Zionist, would I vote for this party or would I vote for that party? It's like what do I? See, you end up caring. You end up caring about what's going on over here, even if you don't identify with the state ideologically or with the Zionist movement. But you end up like having like you just by living here, you end up feeling some type of connection to what's going on, because that's just what happens. So in the Haredi extremism are especially in Israel, are those who really take, for the mostly has to do with Zionism, meaning after the fact that we're all non-Zionists. So there are a lot of groups which are, like I said before, are very anti-Zionist. So let's say here in Jerusalem where I live, and a lot of them in another town nearby, like half hour away from Jerusalem, called Beit Shemesh. So they believe like you really have to demonstrate your non-Zionism, your anti-Zionism.
Really?
And they're very like, I guess the word in English is Puritan about it, meaning like it's not enough not to be Zionist. They believe you can't have any connection with Zionism. Like you can't take state funding, you can't take state benefits, you can't have a connection in your religious organization with anybody else who does. So like they'll write in their newspapers and their magazines, they'll have like horrible like editorials against another Haredi rabbi, because that Haredi rabbi once said that you should vote for a certain party. Oh, so that means you're participating in the Zionist enterprise. So that means you yourself, even though you're Haredi, so you're just one of them. Well, I'm like, even though like that rabbi is non-Zionist, no, because you had some type of connection to Zionism and you did something and this and that, so therefore you became so now you're a collaborator. I guess a collaborator. Collaborator, and they'll look at and they'll put up signs all around Jerusalem how this rabbi or this person he's a traitor, and sometimes they'll demonstrate in front of his house, and so like recently there was a whole issue about like what in Israeli politics about the fact that we don't serve an IDF. So they're trying to the government was trying to figure out if it's legal, if it's not constitutional.
Oh, wow.
So could come up with some law that will figure out how to work this out. That should be legal. It shouldn't be unconstitutional. Right. So any Haredi rabbi or community figure or anything which tried to get involved with the deliberations and the negotiations with the government were branded as traitors. And they had demonstrations in front of their house, and they had horrible and the same thing. Like in my neighborhood, they're building a
settlement?
light rail. A light rail.
Oh, light rail.
This one is very extreme. Like a train. You know what I mean? Like a trolley type of train.
Yeah.
Light rail. And some extremists decided that if it's coming from the Zionist government who's building it, then obviously the only reason why they're building it is in order to destroy the Haredim, because they don't care about us and transportation and public transportation. Obviously, they're only doing it in order to destroy our community, right? So they made huge demonstrations and they turning over tractors and things, and
wow.
It was, and like 5-minute walk from my house, turning over tractors and turning over equipment, because
that's horrible.
Because anything the Zionist government does, or when the vaccines, there was a whole issues with vaccines in America also, but over here it came from like, if the Zionist government is trying to get us to take COVID vaccines, then there must be a plot. There must be some plot in order to.
Wow, so even they're blaming you have the whole blame going on even in Israel. Wow, that's ironic. But okay, Ephraim, any chance you've seen the movie 5 Cameras?
No.
Okay, so essentially what that movie is about, the reason why it's called 5 Cameras, it's just this Palestinian guy, and he's telling the story of like the pictures he was taking were like of the kids who were throwing the rocks at the tanks. Okay. And so he was the guy like filming that, and he broke 5 of his cameras. Like, so he tells the story of the first camera getting broken, and the second one, and third and fourth. And to the last one, his brother winds up getting killed, like between the 4th and the 5th one. Right. So a couple of things I want to ask you about that. Like, one, seeing Israel like in the inside, I noticed that there were a lot of like Arabics living there. People look like we're maybe from Ethiopia, like at the cafes, or I mean, I had this big old like Taliban beard whenever I went there. I had a how do you call it? What are the turbans? I was really into Islam at the time, and there was a guy who was one of the guards, and he came up to me and started speaking in Arabic to me, like if I was going to understand him. He was trying to gauge it whether or not I was like a terrorist or something. And I was like, what the heck? But there are a lot of Arab or African people inside of Israel who are themselves Jews, because that is kind of like a bad stereotype that either all the Jews are it's just like kind of like one people. You have this, was it Ashkenazi and Sephardic? So there's a big mix. And so do you feel like some of that hatred or whatever is stoked up by the media to try to incite racial violence or hatred? What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's a lot of projection going on, because in America, it actually is true that that Ashkenazim make up, like, I'm guessing, I'm throwing out numbers, 70-80% of Jews in America are Ashkenazi, which means that we came from the European diaspora.
European.
Like, just such, but most Jews in the world are not from the European diaspora. They're also from the Middle Eastern diaspora, and they're called either Mizrahi, which means Eastern, or Sephardi, which means Spain, because a lot of them are descendants of Jews who were expelled from Spain in 1492. So they got the name Sephardim. That was Muslim. They were from Muslim Spain, because if you know the history, then the Catholics took over Spain, then they threw out all the Jews and the Muslims. So they have more of an Arabic culture to them. They have Arabic sounding last names, sometimes even Arabic sounding first names, and they have a different culture. And then you have African Jews. Mostly, like you said, most African Jews come from Ethiopia, and they're dark skinned. They look like anyone else from sub-Saharan Africa, and they also have their unique Jewish, like, African culture. And you have also Jews from India who actually, interesting, even though they come from India. They look very Asian. They look like Korean and Chinese. They have like that type of look to them. And it's an interesting.
Wow.
I never figured out why they come from India, but they don't look like they're from India. They look like they're from China. I don't know.
Really?
But
knock me over with the feather, man. I've never heard of that before.
Yeah, look up the B'nai Menashe. I could send you a link afterwards.
Great. Thank you.
There are. I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead. I just want to let Jeff get in here on the next one, but go finish your thought.
Yeah. So Jews are actually look very different from each other. So, like, people project, well, in America, Jews, for whatever reason, look very similar to any other white-skinned American. So Jews are white, but Jews happens to be in America. It worked out like that because the biggest immigrations. Not necessarily. If you go to Brooklyn, in the Flatbush neighborhood, you have a big Syrian Jewish community. You have a big Lebanese. You have a big Lebanese Jewish community. Wow. Also, in Deal, New Jersey, also has a very big Syrian Jewish community. Syrian, Arabic, everything's like Arabic sounding and Arabic type of culture, but they're Jewish and they live in the United States, but they're a minority. So so a lot of Americans, I think, project onto Israel that probably Jews of Israel are like the Jews of America, which is really not the case at all.
Wow. So I do want to get Jeff in here. Speaking of, just anti-Semitism, because this talk is really focusing on anti-Semitism. So I do want to give Jeff a minute to speak specifically about this. And Jeff, if you have any questions you would like to ask Ephraim, please do so. But the question is specifically like how to combat extremism, whether is it direct confrontation or moderation, or if you could fill us in on any of that, Jeff, we'd really appreciate it.
Well, definitely not through direct confrontation, because what that is that becomes cumulative extremism, or there's a reciprocal extremism. And what happens, and I can tell you from my own personal experience, whenever anyone confronted me with violence over the years, and this is typical for most extremists, that would send that person farther back into that echo chamber, or they would become more committed. So whenever there was violence or things like that took place, or someone's out there screaming and hollering at you, throwing things at you, doxing you, these kind of tactics, they don't work. They just do not work. And so that's the way you don't go about combating extremism. And if anybody tells you that you should shame people that are involved in different type of ideologies, or that you should dox them or cause them harm or do violence or things like that, they don't know what they're talking about. Because I can tell you from experience, from lived experience, and from the work that we do at Beyond Barriers, those tactics do not work. They never ever work. The people that are doing it, the doxing and things like that, they can hold up a handful of examples and say, look, this person left. I can tell you from 27 years of experience in the movement, how many people I knew that left by getting doxed. I could count them on one hand. And those people were never ideologues. They were not committed. A black cat could have walked across their path, or someone could have sneezed in their direction. They would have left the movement too. They were not ideologues. An ideologue is not going to leave through those tactics. So they can't hold those up as examples of what that's what doesn't work. That's half the question. The other half of the question is what does work? Empathy, compassion, conversations, dialogue, understanding one another, breaking bread with somebody, as you know my story, but like
breaking naan.
What's that?
I said breaking naan. I'm just bad joke. Continue.
Oh, okay.
Breaking what?
Like having these
naan, like, or so.
You're talking about naan bread from India. You're talking.
Yeah, you're talking about the bread.
Still on India, aren't you?
What kind of bread do you eat? What kind of bread do you eat there? It's not naan. Like the flatbread, whatever that is.
Naan bread is delicious. That's from India.
Yeah. Okay. Well, whatever. But they have a flatbread there as well that you do like the.
Pita.
Okay, pita. That's okay. I'm sorry. Yeah. Breaking pita. I'm sorry. Continue, please.
Breaking pita.
I had to throw a little bit of joke in there because it kind of,
Right.
Yeah, please.
This is a heavy subject we're talking about.
Yeah.
It really is. But what works, is those type of having those conversations. And towards the end of my time in the movement, when we had met with the Muslim filmmaker Dia Khan from White Right Meeting the Enemy, and as you know, my friend Daryl Davis, who works with us now, who's an African American, meeting those people and having those conversations, there was people in the movement that had never met with someone of the Muslim faith, or that I've got people that we're working with right now that had been involved, 50 years, 40 years in the movement. And they say, as far as they knew, they never met a Jewish person before. So they are interested and we're facilitating those conversations, and we're introducing those people when they're ready. Of course, they don't just come out and you don't just do it.
Right.
When they're ready, when we feel that they're ready, then when they're vetted, when we feel comfortable with it, I will introduce them to different people from those communities that they once vilified. Another, you're talking about 5 cameras, and I have seen that, but there's another movie I think that both of you guys, if you haven't seen it, I would highly recommend. And I know the filmmaker, he's from Chicago, great guy. It's called Hope in the Holy Land. And this was a film that just blew me away, because you start watching it and they're covering what's going on over there in Israel. And they start by talking with some of the people from the Palestinian side, and then they talk with some of the people from the Israeli side, and then they interview the guy that helped build one of the walls, and they talk about the settlements, and then they show how people can get along, and in the communities where there's cooperation and there's understanding and all these type of things, and facilitating those conversations. So I actually spoke at Kesher Forum in Chicago with the filmmaker at put on that program a couple months ago, and it was really interesting. But they bring people together from all those communities, and the only thing that I don't want to spoil it, so I'm not going to give away what all took place. But you look at that conversation and the conversations in that, and why I found it so inspiring was because in the work that we do in bringing people together, when you see those type of extremes, where especially when you're like, okay, well, here's the people that have heard all the rhetoric and propaganda or whatever from the Palestinian side, and here's the people that have heard all the rhetoric from the different sections of the Israeli side and why they think that way. And the narrator, or the person that was asking the questions, he was saying, okay, so why do you feel this way, or why, and getting down to that meat and bones of those conversations. And that's part of what we do. And I know I'm on a couple subjects here, but it's part of the way we do it as well as how to reach people is not telling them, we know they're wrong. We know that they're wrong in what they're saying, that, but they don't. So going in there and telling somebody, you're wrong, I can't believe you think that way. Oh, gross, that's vile, that's disgusting. That's what, you want to say when you hear some of the things that people are, that are really hateful or racist or anti-Semitic. But one of the ways to get through to those people is not to be accusatory or be confrontational. And this goes against like our nature as human beings, I think, because when you hear some of those things, you want to be like, why are you saying that? That's disgusting. But listening, and the conversations are reciprocal. So now when you've listened to them, you've shown them that respect. And I know this is what the podcast here is about too, because respect's right in the title. So there's the plug for our
first letter.
Respect, honesty, empathy, but having those conversations and being able to listen, now they have to listen to you too, because if they're not, the conversation's not reciprocal. So
right.
Now you have that opportunity to share your viewpoint and ask them questions.
That's rich.
Well, why do you think of it this way? How about this? And then they may, still be, defending their position, but they'll be thinking in the back of their heads later, like, it causes them to reflect. And that's how it works for me. That's the process is that.
Oh, you put some chills on me. Wow. Thank you. Oh my God. So I thank you for that, Jeff, very, very much. I do want to say this. I saw some of your earlier videos and you are a lot more polished right now. You're looking better, but you're also, there's a fluidity of your speech that is definitely improving. So I think you're on the right track to making some great influence and change in this world. But I do want to ask another question, and I do want to take myself and Jeff off of the screen for a few minutes because I do want to give you the total spotlight right now, Mr. Ephraim, Mr. Ephraim. Okay, I'm sorry. But okay.
Yeah.
The next question I have, I do want to explain it to you. And I do want to ask if you could maybe tell me some of the things that you've seen, because this is going to specifically relate to the Holocaust and one of the worst atrocities in human history. And also, ironically, one of the most well documented, because there's literally just warehouses of documentation that that was done against the Jews in Europe. And so, first question is I generally want to ask you this, like, what sense would it make for someone to deny the Holocaust? That seems to be something that could just totally destroy your credibility because it's so well documented. And so one, wouldn't it destroy anyone's credibility to have such a outlandish position? And then if you could also tell me about, what you have seen, either from, you've told me you spent a lot of time in Ukraine. So if you've seen anything, maybe any of the camps or any of the museums, or you've had any families who've gone through that, I will tell you very specifically, I went to Macedonia and I got to see a Holocaust museum there, specifically about the people from the Balkans. And so this wasn't people don't really understand the level in which Hitler was doing these Holocausts in multiple places, whether it's Poland or the Ukraine. Probably 1 million people dead in the Ukraine. So if you could fill us anything on that topic, I do, just to give you the total spotlight, I do want to take us off. And so I'm not going to butcher your name, but Yeah, please. Please go ahead.
Okay. About first of all, your question about Holocaust denial. Honestly, I never met someone who denied the Holocaust. I can't imagine what someone's motivation or way of thinking would be. Meaning, to be more precise, I can imagine maybe it comes from some type of conspiracy thinking that that a lot of people have, that even if there's a lot of evidence or a lot of people say something, but like I know that the real truth, especially the less they're exposed to real documentation about something. So they imagine it must be some type of conspiracy thinking, or they weren't educated about world history, about what happened or what was really going on over there. For someone like me, it's very obvious because I'm a grandchild of survivors. All my grandparents and one great grandmother were survivors, as was I grew up in, like I said, I grew up in Brooklyn in a neighborhood called Borough Park. And I think every single one of my friends from kindergarten up through who knows when, I think I have one friend who wasn't a descended from Holocaust, who didn't have grandparents, meaning if you think about it from the time you're in kindergarten and up till the time you're in your 20s, and every single person you've met, and every single person you've gone to school with, everyone your brothers and sisters are friends with, every single person in the street is either a grandchild of a Holocaust survivor, or a child of a Holocaust survivor, or a Holocaust survivor themselves. Everywhere you go. So the Holocaust was like was all the time. And we didn't call it Holocaust. We used to call it the war. And you speak to your grandmother says, well, before the war. And like everyone's parents doesn't have grandparents. Like be, everyone you meet is like everyone you know doesn't have, every adult you know doesn't have grandparents. And they never met their grandparents. Every grandparent you know hasn't seen their parents since the war. It's such a it's so real. Like my grandmother had numbers on her arms. They in Auschwitz they tattooed numbers on the arms because you became a number and not you weren't a person anymore. It was such a real thing. All my grandparents had stories all the time about how they survived and how they ran away and how they did this and how they ended up here, how they ended up there. Not all my grandparents had numbers because it depended which camp you ended up and how you ended up and what happened over there. My wife's grandmother also had numbers on her arms. My wife's family also, they're all Holocaust survivors, and all of my siblings are married to grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. And all my wife's siblings are married to Holocaust survivors, and all my
Wow.
it just like I think I was like 18 the first time I met somebody who actually had a grandparent who wasn't a Holocaust survivor.
Wow.
So it's like such a thing, and all the stories and all the names and all the camps. And one of the things Haredim did after the war, after the Holocaust, after the war, was we named our communities after the communities that we rebuilt in America and in Israel and in London and wherever else in the world, in Belgium. We renamed them after places that were destroyed in the Holocaust. For example, I went to a school in Brooklyn called Mir, which is named after a town in Belarus, which was destroyed by the Nazis. Just an example. My kids go to a school called Vizhnitz, which is a town in Ukraine, which is destroyed by the Nazis, and so on and so forth. So it's like the Holocaust was such a real thing for me that I don't. It's and like they say that I'm like I guess I'm called second generation Holocaust survivor. So they say the trauma of the Holocaust was so strong that my parents' generation still has it and my generation still has it. Like we have certain like things, like they say that, like for example, to be afraid of cops. You ever heard, like I guess there are a lot of communities in America which are afraid of police, but like especially like my community, there's like we're not like, I guess like we're not really afraid that by a traffic stop they're going to shoot us. With like I guess we should be happy for that. But like when a police, like a lot of people in my community, like a policeman in their head is like somehow it's stuck in their head like every policeman is a Nazi, and like every policeman is a Nazi.
I totally get that. I totally get that.
Yeah, and even though like it doesn't, I remember once I was at an event and a security guard was like directing like foot traffic, and my uncle was there, and my uncle started like he had a breakdown, like he said like you're a
Oh
Nazi,
God! Oh my
and
God!
what Nazi? Like what Nazi? He's a security guard. He starts going, you Nazi and you anti-Semite. Like what? I was like, I was like, uncle, calm down. Like he's just a security guard. And I realized, I realized that. And also, like I have friends, like every time they get a traffic stop, they say that Nazi, like what Nazi? He's a traffic guy. Like I'm a little bit
Right.
not. I'm less like that than my friend, but like it's like this trauma. Like every policeman is looking for you because to drag you away, and even though they even if you know how not true it is, it's not. But like you have this thing in your head that all the cops are out to get us, and all the government's out to get you, and they have this. I guess it's also like some type of conspiracy thinking, also. But like
Yeah.
it's the trauma of the Holocaust, or like
Right.
different
And
things. Yeah.
you know what? I've been in North Korea on a few occasions, and I've got a chance to work with North Korean refugees here in South Korea. And one of the guys who I was interviewing, I told him, well, no, he told me, he said, you know, Isaiah, he says, I know everything that my government told me is total nonsense. Like he says, I know it's a lie. I know it's a lie, but he told me, because I was doing a lot to sort of support him, like financially and, you know, food and clothes and stuff like that. And he told me that he said, but I can't help it. He told me that he couldn't help it, that the anti-Americanism was so ingrained into him that he had a hard time like trusting me, you know? And I will say this, this is not in the slightest sense of the word to condone like what the Germans did or anything like that. But when I went to North Korea and I saw all of the propaganda and all the anti-American propaganda, very specifically, I'll say that, it was like 90% of it was aimed at Americans, and they put it in your face so you'd know you were going to see it, you know? But you could totally understand that level of brainwashing and what that could do to people, to where they just hated and totally, and for them, it was a dehumanization of Americans. And so that is not in any sense of the word to justify what the army did there. But when you have the government doing that much to control your thinking through propaganda, I can tell you, there was this one piece of propaganda where they had this guy, and he was like pointing like this, and his face was like contorted in such an ugly way, and it left like it left something totally ugly inside of me that I've never been able to shake. Seeing that guy's face, like just the hatred and disdain and anger he had, it was traumatic. I can tell you this, I had nightmares for weeks after of being, you know, in North Korea, being stuck there. But I will say this, and then I want to let we're coming up on the hour right now. I do want to say this, that I saw in Cambodia skulls stacked up 5,000 in a pagoda there. It's like the killing fields of Cambodia, like something like 2 million people were killed. And so to think that human beings don't do these kind of things, whether it's the Armenian genocide or, you know, the Khmer Rouge, 2 million people dead in North Korea, like people are exceptionally good at being very bad to each other, you know? And so to think that someone like Hitler, who was an opportunist, wouldn't do something like this I can't even understand what goes on through people's minds to like try to minimize people's pain and suffering like that. And it's really, really thank you for sharing that about everyone who you've known essentially has in some way or another been affected by this still to this day. And yeah, thank you for sharing that I do want to ask you one quick question, then we'll let Jeff get in here at the end. We'll say some last goodbyes. So, there was a famous case where a Jewish lawyer was representing this, I believe it was the KKK or Nazis or somebody, some kind of hate group, but they were being denied a permit to protest because they were Nazis. And incidentally, the guy who Jeff was talking about, Daryl Davis, he lent his bus to some of these guys because they didn't want to lend them a bus because they were a hate group. And so he's like, well, I have a bus. You can use my bus to go out to this KKK rally or whatever. And when they came back, he's like, just fill it up with gas or whatever. And when they came back to drop it off, he's like, hey, like coming for a drink. And some of them came in and some of them like they didn't want to have a drink with him because he's black. But that was a way in which he fought against it and with compassion and with empathy and love and respect. I thought it was brilliant the way he did that, because he was breaking something that was inside of them that was really, really rough. But anyway, the point being is that the Jewish lawyer represented this group because he believed so much in freedom of speech, even if it's to promote hatred or Holocaust denial. And he said, like, hey, I'm going to be there protesting against you, but you deserve this right. And so the question I want to ask you real quick, Ephraim, is that Canada right now is considering passing some laws to make Holocaust denial or downplaying it like illegal. And I was wondering if you have any thoughts on that, whether or not you consider that to be hate speech, or if people should have that right to promote the nonsense that they do. Go ahead.
So I don't know, growing up in America, so you have this like concept of like free speech and being very extreme about free speech. Right now, it's a big debate in America. Everyone's talking about it, especially with Twitter and all these things. I was like, what Jeff was saying, the way I feel is the way to combat lies is by talking. If you never bring it out into the air, then no one will ever be able to discuss it. So I don't know what that means, like to stop hate speech, because people will always say hateful things, like, well, we're gonna like bug people's houses and find out if they said something not nice to their little brother. Like, of course, it's not the same thing, but if you won't be able to. I could be just because I grew up in America, so I have that way of thinking, as opposed to Canada or England, where they have they don't have that same way of thinking. But like let a Holocaust denier say what he wants to say, and then let someone else counter him and discuss it with him, and maybe come somewhere. So I don't know. I don't know if telling someone that, oh, you can't even discuss this, you can't even say this. I don't know how that's going to help anything, how that's going to change anyone's minds. Maybe I'm wrong, because maybe the non-Americans have some deeper understanding of that human psychology that I don't. But I don't know.
Can I just say this? I'm going to give Jeff the opportunity to give his last words that he would like to say. But that is a fascinating take. It may seem a little bit counterintuitive at first, because you might think, oh, well, if they're able to spread these ideas, they can hurt more people. But Jeff had said something interesting as well, that if you keep shutting them down, they might retreat and get even more further radicalized. Whereas, because they feel like they're having this avenue taken from them. And so their next move might be to like a gun or a bomb or something like that. So, but for your take was, hey, if someone, let's say to you, someone denied the Holocaust to you, that would be an opportunity for you to say, hey, my grandma or X, Y, and Z had this, I grew up seeing these things. And I, as you were talking about all the people who you've known, I mean, that's an opportunity. I literally never would have thought about that. I'm kind of like pro that, just because of free speech. But on the other hand, maybe that's an opportunity in disguise right there. So I really want to thank you for that. But I do want to give last opportunities. If anybody has any last thoughts, I'm going to give it over to Jeff, and then Ephraim, you can go, and then I'll give my last thoughts. So Jeff, tell us how we can find you.
Yeah, I was going to say, Ephraim, thanks for sharing all that. And what you're talking about with the family trauma is something called generational trauma, actually. And it's something that I didn't know about until I got out of the movement, and I've learned about it since. And when I heard you talking about it, boom, that word came right back. That's generational trauma. And that's it's a real thing. And especially a lot of people that have had trauma like that, and Holocaust, especially Holocaust survivors and their families. I've asked so many Jewish people about that, and they all say yes, that's something, and they've shared personal examples and stories. So it's incredible. But under the free speech, what you guys were talking about as well, I do think exactly what both of you guys said about having that opportunity for conversations. Right there is a place where we can change hearts and minds. And if you don't have conversations and you don't allow for that kind of talk, I mean, hate speech is ugly. I mean, nobody can deny that. It's ugly and we don't want to hear it. But when you shut those people down and you tell them, okay, we're not going to hear this. And I have a good example on this that has nothing to do with hate speech or anything like that, but it's a personal example from my own story from my childhood. Growing up as a young man, we're talking like junior high, high school, around that period of time. I used to watch Nightline on television, news stories, and this show on Nightline came, and maybe you guys have heard of the band or not, but there was a rap band called 2 Live Crew. I grew up in rural Minnesota. There was no rap music on the radio. I didn't even know what it was. All right, well, 2 Live Crew had come out, and the they sing a lot of sexual stuff and
quite raunchy
and raunchy stuff, right? Okay, so they came out and they were being banned at some locations. Their music was getting banned. Certain clubs wouldn't let them play and things like that. And I said at 15, 14 years old, whatever it was, who's 2 Live Crew? I got to go out and get that cassette.
Oh God,
I got to go, and I became a fan of 2 Live Crew because why? Because they were being banned. You weren't supposed to listen to it. It was the forbidden fruit, so to speak, like a forbidden fruit. You weren't allowed to have that. So I wanted to hear what it was, and then I, got into it and bought their latest tapes and all that kind of stuff. Wow. That's a pretty natural thing, and that's what happens when you start censoring people and saying, well, you can't say this, you can't say that. In America now, if you say, you know what, I'm going to go do this, or I'm going to go cause harm to that person, that's illegal, and then you should be thrown off the internet or anywhere else. If you're saying illegal things, you should be in trouble, and the fullest extent of the law should be brought down on you. But otherwise, anything else that doesn't fall within that legality, what you're doing is you're sending those people now into their own echo chambers. They don't have that opportunity for conversation. You don't have that opportunity to share with them interpersonal stories, be able to change hearts and minds, and sit down with somebody from a different perspective. Not everybody wants to have those conversations either, and you can't blame them. Most people don't, but those brave souls, people like Diakon, who I mentioned earlier, Daryl Davis, being able to sit down with those people and say, look, this is my experience. This is what happened to me. That's how you change hearts and minds, and that's how you heal it. The governments need to start listening to this, and the social media executives that think that they're doing this great, glorious thing by silencing voices, or things like that. They need to start listening to the people that have been there, that understand it, that know where that leads, because they're building up those echo chambers and they're making matters worse. The greatest gift that you could give to an extremist is telling them that they need to be silenced, because now those perceived grievances, where they think, oh, well, the whole world's out to get me, the whole world's trying to silence me, now I need to go do something worse. If my voice isn't being heard, now I'm going to pick up a gun, or I'm going to resort to violence. I'm going to make myself heard. That's how. Now, I'm not saying I'm not advocating that by any means.
Yeah, it's just reality.
The opposite. I'm saying that's the mindset. That's where they're coming from, and that's something that we need to consider, and we need to. I'm not saying I have all the answers, but I can say from experience that's how these folks think that are involved in that stuff. And if you don't have the opportunity to work on changing hearts and minds, you're going to have more extremism in the future.
All right, and then we have Ephraim. If you could give us your last thoughts, please.
I don't really have much to add. Also, basically, just a summary of what we said. The best way to build bridges is to talk, to open ourselves up to other people, and to be able to listen to other people and to talk to other people. That's
All right.
about it.
All right. Well, I want to close off real quick here and tell just real quick about Jeff Shoep and his conversion. Really quick, the one of the guys who made one of the biggest impacts was Daryl Davis, and that guy deserves all the credit in the world, because I can tell you, as much as I enjoy like promoting peace and talks, like I get to do so from behind the covers of a computer inside of my air-conditioned apartment, and that guy went out into the streets and really got down and dirty with these guys, and that's something that I think we can all do a little bit better job of. And this is my little way of giving back a little bit to people, to have an opportunity to speak, even when we don't agree on everything. So I hear your baby's waking up right now in the background. So we are going to close off here, but I really want to thank Jeff and Ephraim. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I finally got it right. Okay. Yeah, I want to thank you for your time. And you can check out Jeff. Find Jeff at, he's on Twitter, Scoop Jeff. And then we have www.jeffscoop.com, and then beyondbarriers.org, beyondbarriersusa.org. And thank you guys both for coming. And I really hope someone listens to this, and maybe if they do, are holding on to some of these extremist views, to understand that there are people out there who are being affected by this. But, we're all, as we're just progressing through life, I just think that we should just be trying to help each other, no matter where we are, here or there, that we're all just trying to learn and grow. And I just really, really believe that the more we can help each other as we're going through this planet, there's enough bad things going on in the world right now. We have the Ukraine thing, we have Corona, and we're humans, and we're inhabiting this planet together. So the more we can do that, I think the better we're going to be as a society and as a species. So with that being said, I want to thank you for joining us today at RG Podcast. Check us out at www.rgpodcast.com. Check us out on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Spotify. Anywhere you can find someone, you can find us. So we look forward to seeing you back. If you're not subscribed, please do so. And we're going to leave you with this outro.